Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This is episode 13 of When Is It About the Patient? And today our special guest is Mariah Karnawa. She's from NAMI. I don't know if I said that right.
Yep.
And today we're going to talk about their role in the community and what they do for us. So we'll get started with her explaining to us what that acronym stands for.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name's Mariah. I'm the executive director for NAMI of Greater Toledo. NAMI stands for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I'll tell you a little bit about where we originated from. NAMI Toledo started back in 1982. And basically, we are the grassroots mental health agency across the country. We have about 600 affiliates across the country. We are a family-oriented organization that really works with anybody impacted with a mental health challenge. A lot of times it's not just the individual, it's the families that are impacted. So we really work to provide support, education, and then at that next level, the advocacy to bring about change that's needed in this area.
So how do you go about doing that? And you kind of explained what you do. What's the general mission of it? Just to try to get um, help to those dealing with mental illness, or what's
Yeah,
the?
so it's really those three pillars: support, education, and advocacy. But we really focus on these additional objectives of early interventions. The sooner we get people connected to resources and support, the less likely they are to stay in that crisis, the less length of time they are in that crisis, but also the greater chance for recovery, less impact to the family. So early intervention is super important. The second piece of that is really supporting the community to provide the best possible care. So from an advocacy standpoint, from a convening standpoint, we really try to push the mission for trauma-informed care, cultural humility. And then another component that we really focus on is diversion from the criminal justice system. So often in our history, we have over-criminalized people for something that treatment could really impact. So let me just back up. That is support. We offer at no cost to the families we serve support groups, often peer led. So we have those for peer to peer, for families impacted with a mental health challenge, as well as a young adult group, just really providing that humanization and that support. The other component around education is just mental health 101 and diving into some of the disorders that impact these individuals and families. Um, so that's kind of in a nutshell. We also have some different leadership initiatives I'm sure we'll talk about, but it's really normalizing mental health as everyday whole health. I don't know when we cut the head off from the rest of the body, but mental health is just another component of physical health, of whole health, and really serving the individual.
I think I don't want to get us too off topic, but honestly, I just think that for so many years it was stigmatized
Right.
and people were hesitant to share or to even talk about their mental health. And I think a lot of that is being more normalized. And I hate to say this, but it does help when you have some famous people who get up and say, hey, look, this is what happened to me. And, it helps to normalize it. Where I think so many times people felt like, well, I can't talk about that. People think I'm crazy, and let's face it, who hasn't had a moment of a mental health issue?
Right. Yeah. It's in my title to say National Alliance for Mental Illness, but I wish we referred to it as a wellness spectrum. Everybody has good days and we have bad days. And when we pretend otherwise, we're setting others up for failure and unrealistic expectations. Everybody is going to struggle at some point, and that's okay. It's really connecting folks to that, to treatment, because treatment works. That's another piece of this, is that we've almost otherized the need for help, right? You said it, stigma was a thing in the past. It is still very much a thing of current state. I will credit something good that came out of the pandemic, as we are all more aware of how vital our mental health is to our everyday wellness. I think our youth are really helping us identify mental health as a priority in their space as well. We look at that from a workplace standpoint. Our youth are the next workforce. And so how we support them in their family structure, but really in the workplace, in the school systems, bringing about everyday awareness to mental health is part of how we streamline it. And you said, when a famous person is able to show that, I'm trying on a local level to challenge leaders. How do we emulate our own self-care? I always talk about in the workplace, we romanticize the grind, like just keep working harder. How is that always, that's going to play out in our mental health as well. So I think providing opportunities to normalize, to share in our struggles. As a leader, I am the first to say, I have a therapist. I think everybody should have one, and just as part of our everyday wellness, that we check in with one another, that we include that as, hey, how are you feeling today? Not just how's that stomach ache working out for you? What's causing your stomach ache, right? What happens physically is going to play out mentally. What happens mentally is playing out in our bodies physically. So just allowing space to acknowledge that often will set the tone for the next person, that they too can acknowledge that, right? One of the things that we found from COVID is this issue with social isolation. As connected as we appear to be with all of our phones and technology, we are so isolated. And when we are in the midst of a challenge, a crisis, a bad day, we feel like we're the only one that can possibly know what that feels like, or that it's happening to, when a lot of times we just need to be more vulnerable and transparent that I struggle too. We all do. So just bringing all of that to everyday awareness.
Yeah, no, therapy, I'm a huge therapy advocate, and I'll be the first one to tell you, you know, been in and out of therapy numerous times during my life, and it's so beneficial because you talk to a person who's objective, and asks you the hard questions that makes you look at yourself and say, okay, yeah, why is that going on? Or how am I managing that? So therapy is definitely, it can help anyone.
I
Yeah, I
think
think, go ahead, Carrie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest issue with therapy is finding the right therapist for you, or a good therapist. There have been so many horror stories, and I don't know how people got, into that as their career, that probably just like any career, that really don't belong in that space. And so just finding that therapist, and maybe maybe your organization does help vet those and lead people to, obviously they're all accredited, but with good outcomes or things like that, to connect the patients to therapists that you think are right for them, or things like that. And maybe you can speak a little bit to that, because I think that's part of the issue too, is finding the right therapist to work with. Probably like any medical
Absolutely. So that I'm going to speak to that on a couple of levels. One, we have family navigation services, or a behavioral health navigator. Those navigators are there to help navigate these complex systems. When you start within the mental health system, a lot of times we don't realize we have a choice, we have a voice, right? And so recognizing the right fit for your therapist. If you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel seen or heard or whatever, you just don't have a good vibe, go to the next, right? And sometimes that's hard to know that you have that choice. One of the things that we do here through our leadership initiatives, we have an African American leadership initiative, a Latin leadership initiative, and a MENA, Middle Eastern Northern African initiative, that allows for some more specific initiatives around these specific populations, so that that need to have someone who can relate to your situation is really important. The other piece that I wanted to mention is we don't talk enough about recovery and success of treatment. Treatment works. We have to be consistent. We have to be willing to try, and it's not an overnight process. So keeping people encouraged in the treatment process is important, but also the strategies. I like to relate this to physical athletes' success, right? They train their bodies to get there. We have, if you find the right therapist, they're going to give you usable strategies to retrain your brain. And sometimes that feels awkward. It's not, it's a practice. We have to do it multiple times for it to really resonate and create change in ourselves. So I think it's overwhelming. And so having that connection to a support group to say, yeah, I didn't get it at first either, or I really, it didn't take the first 3 times, whatever that is normalizing that it is a process and you are the driver for your own treatment but you have choice, and I think that's something that feels out of our control often in these large healthcare systems is what rights do we have? What choice do we have? How do we really find what works? And often that means even from a medication standpoint, trying things. Yep, that didn't work. Well, we got to keep trying. But having people that can share in their testimony that this is what worked for me, don't give up. A big message that NAMI focuses on is you're not alone. And we often feel like we're the only one. So that's a big piece of what we try to offer as well.
And I think that unfortunately, there's a shortage of providers that are able to give this kind of care. So with those limitations, it makes it more of a struggle to, let's say, if you have someone that you didn't really click with, or you feel like, this isn't going to work. So now you just shorten the short list.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that wait list is a tricky thing because of our crisis response system in Toledo. We have some new urgent cares that are specific to mental health. And that's great. We can get people seen immediately. But the next follow-up to their therapist might be a month from now. So how do we provide that gap service? That's where NAMI comes in. Being able to help, again, navigate, connect people to resources and provide that support until they can get back to their clinician is really important. I think depending on what the need is of the client, maybe they are able to schedule more frequently. But like you said, there is such a shortage, which is why we really work to encourage the pipeline toward the mental health field. We need more diversity representation in that field because people need to see and be able to relate to that therapist. And so that definitely a lot of folks are feeling that shortage for sure.
How does someone reach out to you if, first of all, how do they determine whether they or their family member thinks they have a mental illness, that they need some help with? I mean, and we talked about, we all need some help, but I'm just talking about, how do we get that ball rolling when their angsty teen seems a little bit more than normal angsty teen or something like that they recognize that there's something that's a little bit deeper than just what they think is normal, and how does that process all start? And I'm sorry, I'm kind of fumbling here.
That's okay. So, and the answer is reach out. I think that's another barrier that we have is our courage to ask questions and ask for help often, right? Especially the stigma that is still surrounds so many families around, well, that's our problem. We'll deal with that in-house in family, right? So our encouragement is call and ask. Let us help figure out there's no cookie cutter, easy response for anyone. Everybody's journey, while it is individual, there's a lot of crossover and things that people can connect around, but their individual needs, we don't know what that is until we explore that. So folks can call NAMI and ask to speak with a family navigator or a behavioral health navigator, and they really just kind of take what the issue is. And here's sort of the extension from healthcare is we are now aware of the social determinants of health, all of these factors that impact our everyday health. Well, it's impacting our mental health as well. So being able to sort of troubleshoot and work through what those needs are, our navigators are trained to know the different resources across communities. So we really just dive into the needs of that family individually and make those resource and referrals. So that's really the main crux of what we do beyond support is making those referrals for folks so that we have confidence or know where to go next in the process. So we make referrals like that. We can also connect them directly to our partners. One of the things that we are trying to develop this summer at NAMI is networking for frontline staff. It's one thing to say, hey, go call Zeph, actually call Deb. Having those warm transfers and the relationships is going to give folks confidence and just that next step, I think will go a little bit further. So we're trying to facilitate some of that frontline staff networking just so that we're not sending people to more hotlines, give them someone direct that can help them walk through this process. So, a lot of that comes from our own internal relationship building amongst our partners. And NAMI really has the opportunity to be that neutral convener in the mental health space. We work with, mental health and addiction services, but getting people the right care at the right time is part of that navigation service.
Okay, so a quick question on that. So if I'm the average person and there's a mental health crisis in my family, I'm not necessarily going to know to reach out to you, and I certainly don't know what a family navigator is or a behavioral health navigator. So if I go to my primary care, let's say, go to something's wrong, I'll go to the doctor to discuss this, then is that how referrals are generated back to you from like primary care practice?
Sure, it could be. And that's one of the things that we have made progress in the years past is when we went to the doctor for something physical, now they're asking, have you had any thoughts of self-harm or are you safe at home? Or these screening questions are now routine in our physical health systems. So they are aware of us, or we hope we continue to work on branding and just networking as a system to make sure folks know. I always say in our community, we are resource rich. If only we knew. So how we facilitate that communication is important. And like you said, you wouldn't know to say a family navigator. So you can call NAMI and say, I need help. And that's all we need to hear, right? But the other piece of this is the behind the scenes algorithms and things like that connect people when they're looking for crisis help or mental health, searching. NAMI should pop up. But the other piece of that too is sort of the terminology that we're using. We've sort of kept mental health and addiction separate. Mental health is separate from physical health. And so really just bridging in how we talk about it outside of NAMI in everyday community spaces is that, again, getting help as soon as possible. Most of the time when they come to us, there's already a crisis or something happening that makes their situation difficult for them to have reached out to us at all. So we really encourage folks in our education seminars, in our outreach, is when in doubt, ask, how can we get people connected earlier? That really falls back to us normalizing the conversation.
I like that you say we're resource rich, but we don't talk to each other. And I've always had concerns about that because, there are a number of different organizations, and I always wondered if everyone was working in concert or is everyone siloed?
It's getting better because from one, the SDOH awareness, we all know now that in healthcare, all of this, it should have been no-brainer along the way, but we were very siloed. But now we know in healthcare and in mental health, I say health and mental health is the same thing. We now know that where you live and where you work what your access to food and transportation, all of those things are social factors that are going to impact your health. So now where we used to be just health focused, we now work with education. We now work with housing. Housing is a form of suicide prevention, So just looking at these factors and breaking down some of these barriers, I think it's happening in the health space, but we still have a lot of work to normalize that mental health is an obvious inclusion in full health. While it sounds like a no-brainer, it's still not an everyday consideration. When we talk about whole health, physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, it's still one body. So how do we bring all of that together?
How do you evaluate a patient, or is that passed along to somebody else? How does that work when someone reaches out? I think I have some issues. I need help. How do you go about starting an evaluation to get them to the right resource?
Sure. So really, let me reiterate, we are not clinicians. While some of them will have master's degrees, social work degrees, therapists, they are there to really make those connections to treatment providers. So we dive into what is the issue? Have you talked to anybody before about this? Do we go straight to they need a therapist, or is it they need some other troubleshooting in the factors of their life to get them to that next step? They're never going to make it to treatment if they don't have transportation, so we have to back up and really look at what are the needs of the individual and how can we break down barriers that might be in the way of them accessing treatment, whether it be emotional support, that they need encouragement around going to seek treatment, or they need a referral to a provider. We really just try to look at case by case, what's going on. Tell us more about your situation. A big piece of what our navigators are trained in is that motivational interviewing, knowing what questions to ask. When we say, what help do you need? I don't know, so how do we help them understand what their needs are? And it really is just a process of good listening and knowing what questions to ask.
And do you have folks that do like that intake kind of eval, that when they call, they get somebody like that, or I'm just wondering how it works really. So
yeah.
and just call. I'm not sure. No,
Sure. And it depends, because we get all kinds of different calls. A lot of times when someone is struggling with a mental health disorder, they have all of these other impacts happening. So I'm at risk of losing my housing because I haven't been able to go to work, so I can't pay my bills. And so let's figure out how to protect your housing first. Then let's back up and talk about your job and what you need to get there. So I think while there's not there are screening questions that we can ask, it's really derivative of where the question starts, right? So what is the main thing that you're calling about today? How can we help you? And then a lot of times it's our navigators will walk that journey with them. A lot of it is over the phone, but we will go with you if needed. You can come to us and we can dive into these resources together. So it's not, again, I think it would be nice if everyone was conveniently, this is A, B, and C. It doesn't work that way. So really, it's just individualizing what their needs are.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone's different. So I'm curious, do you get a lot of addiction calls?
But it's kind of interesting. We are stepping into that space a little bit. This is another one that I'm not sure why it was separate. It says mental health and addiction. So a lot of times addiction is a byproduct of a mental health disorder. So they go hand in hand. So we are really trying to include that talk track as we're talking to people. If they present with addiction, let's dive into what is the root cause here? Why, what is stemming your need to self-medicate? Or we talk about addiction as a coping skill. It's not a good one, but it's a coping skill. So what are you struggling with coping around? So we do get those addiction requests, but again, we want to get them connected to treatment services. And so a lot of times that's what they're calling about is who can I talk to about this? And a lot of times we get calls from the families that are impacted. And this is a statistic that says 1 in 5 are impacted with a mental health challenge. 1 in 20 have a diagnosable major disorder. But I challenge all of that to say it's probably underreported. And the number is really 5 in 5 are impacted though. We all know somebody. We are all subject to good days, bad days, and our own mental health challenges along the way. So yeah.
Well, with the legalization of gambling, and we have a casino here, and now there's sports betting, and it's everywhere you look. It's they have a lot of money. There's a lot of marketing on television. There's marketing on the internet. So drugs are not the only addiction or the only thing impacting families, because if
Oh.
you're addicted to gambling,
Yeah.
you could be wondering how you're going to make your rent payment.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I do think that one area, if you try to look up facilities for gambling addiction, they are few and far between versus, drug addiction, things like that. So,
Yeah, that's a new realization. I know our partners at Zeph has a gambling prevention program as well as a gambling treatment initiative. So it's out there, but it's so normalized, right? I think of that from our addiction standpoint. I always talk about food,
sure.
that it's our coping skill, but whether it's always positive, it's something that is a part of every day, but are we overeating? Are we, simplifying some of that? So the same thing with how we view addiction. Boy, it's been a rough day. I need a drink, right? We normalize that and we trivialize that that's actually a byproduct of poor coping skills, right? The way that we celebrate, oh, let's have a drink. Oh, I haven't seen you in forever. Let's grab some food. I'm having a bad day. Let's eat. I'm bored. Let's eat, So
Yeah.
looking at how we model positive coping skills, I try to challenge folks on that all the time is how are you taking care of yourself? Because how we model that for other people makes or breaks or encourages them or discourages them toward their own approach.
well,
That's a good.
on the flip side, it's legal. So, alcohol is
Hey,
legal. Gambling is now legal. When I was young, you look pretty young to me, Mariah, so
well, thank you.
probably don't remember this, but there were illegal gambling rings that operated within the city, on sports betting, and
Dog fighting.
people
Yeah.
ran
Yeah.
what they called tickets.
Uh-huh.
And so that was illegal. And if you got caught, you got prosecuted. So that was a different animal, but now it's legal. And it just, so that way, I think it works to normalize it. Like what's legal, everybody does it. No, everybody doesn't do it, but it's not a good, helpful for deterrent when it's legal and it's out there and they're marketing in your face.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I think for some people who don't have an addictive personality, it can be entertainment. Having a drink is, doing something with your friends, the same with gambling. No, I went to this casino and I threw $20. It's here or there, whatever. It's a form of entertainment versus someone with that addictive personality that really has a more mental issue, that this is their coping mechanism, like you were discussing, that throws them into, over the edge or into a bad state with it in any of these types of things that we're discussing right now. So
I often wonder what that trigger is for the people who are addicted to gambling, what that trigger is. It just the excitement, the exhilaration? Like, we'll just say you bet on a basketball game because they're in the playoffs, right? So I bet on, so it's the excitement of watching and wondering and waiting to see if I'm going to win, or is there other triggers underlying all of that?
Yeah, and I can't say for sure, but I think some of it is the risk. Some of it is that instant gratification of I won, I joke that If I had extra money that I could blow, I would probably have a problem with gambling, but I can't. But because I want to win and I feel lucky. I feel lucky. I like that feeling, right? So I think that it just is a personality thing, what their particular trigger is or what makes that so appealing. For me, I think there's such risk involved that I can't go down that route for very long, and so others that are just so involved in the hope of change or that payout. Is that what's driving them? And just going back to the basics of addiction is the dopamine, right?
Yeah.
It makes you feel good. So I think a lot of times what would make sense to those that don't have the addiction personality or the addictive personality, it doesn't make as much sense, right? But it's not a rational behavior as to why I'm taking my last dollar and I'm putting it in here again, right? Because my hope for the payout, the return is greater than the reality of the risk.
Right.
Exactly.
Yep. Do you support family interventions? Is that part of anything you guys do? Or is that, again, like referring to someone, or how does that work?
Yeah, so NAMI, Ohio, we are part of the state of Ohio's affiliates here in Ohio. We have a collaboration with Lucas County Family First Council, and we have a shared employee that does parent advocacy. So these are the high need families that are touching multiple systems that really have some extensive needs. We have someone that is able to really case manage and just provide that extra level of support. So we do have family advocacy in our scope, but as well as still making referrals for ongoing treatment and encouraging them to access the support groups that we have too, because again, in the midst of these challenges, it can be so overwhelming and so isolating that having that connection back to others in a similar boat really is transformative sometimes.
So then are you guys the resource facilitator for the single mom who needs inpatient care and she has 4 kids and she doesn't really have a support system?
Yeah, that's tricky. So we would help navigate that journey with her, and our parent advocacy group is really helpful in that because again, they're connected to children's services and CASA and different partners that can help provide that intermediate support for the children. When the mom is in need of, like you said, maybe she needs to be inpatient for a little while. Who's going to take care of the kids? So really helping facilitate what that looks like is a really tough thing to balance when you're trying to figure out your own wellness and none of that is obvious, right? I mean, there's just so many conflicting crises going on often. It's not just that she's struggling and aware of the mental health needs. It's again, my kids are at risk of, I can't go and take care of myself if I'm not taking care of my children, right? So I think that there's all of these competing priorities and needs. So I think that's one of the true blessings of this work is, again, you're not alone and there's help out there and experts that know what that field looks like. As someone who has a background in healthcare, when I've had my own health challenges, I didn't know how to navigate the system I worked in, So I think it's really
Join the
overwhelming.
club.
Right. There's so many aspects to work through that it really does help to have someone else say, this is what I would do. Here's where you should go. And I'll go with you.
And I think your point, well taken, is the whole reason that Chris initiated this podcast and I jumped on board with her for that very reason, is that people just don't know how to navigate, and we want to get the word out about different aspects of healthcare, that this is someone you could connect with. This is a resource. And so your point is so well taken, and why we are even doing this. So
yeah, thank you. I think it really, we just have to keep talking about it. And I think too, as a community, the more that we can create a shared language we're all saying the same thing, but we're saying it in 10 different ways. So none of it is resonating. So if we can create a shared language and a shared value around normalizing, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay, but that there is help out there. So again, in the midst of our crisis, we can't see beyond the immediate obstacle. Not that there's another side to this, right? There's the other side of recovery. And I think that's something I like to talk about a lot because it is so bleak and scary and overwhelming and emotional in these moments. But there's another side to recovery, and treatment works. So giving people hope and encouragement is just something that requires all of us to stand up in. And if you don't mind, I have a really quick anecdote that I think talks about how we come together as a community. So I am the board chair for Lucas County Suicide Prevention, and I had hired a youth right out of college, social work degree, and they came in and I was like, I create safe spaces. I was so proud of my history, right? And they were like, oh yeah, that's nice. How can you say what is safe for me or them or her? And I was like, like that was pretty arrogant of me, right? To think that I can create a safe space for anybody, when in fact, I'm just creating a space that feels comfortable for me, right? And I'm assuming that that makes everybody else feel comfortable too. Not the case. So they challenged me and said, that's nice. But if we are trying to get ahead of things and work upstream, and at NAMI, we make individual recommendations and supports for individuals and families. But how do we get in front of it? We're so reactive as a society. How
Yes.
do we create and impact change? How do we be proactive? And one of the challenges they said was the goal is to create accountable spaces. And I was like, oh, that's it, right? So I spent 2 years talking about, hey, go be accountable. Hey, how are you being accountable? And again, and sometimes in my own failing, I was challenged by somebody that said, okay, that's great, but it's not one person or agency's job to fix. Our quest as a community is to create shared accountability. And that rocked my world, because we're all coming at these problems individually or siloed in our agencies or our fields, when this is a collective culture problem we have as a society that says, don't ask for help, you're weak, you're broken. No, we are all a work in progress. Life is a journey, and no one got here on their own. So as a leader, I challenge folks to help me create accountable spaces in that shared accountability. But how are we modeling access? How are we modeling our own mental health? And it's become cliche. Self-care is, go on vacation. That's not accessible to everybody. And it starts with the basics of, did you get sleep last night? Have you drank your water today? And I challenge folks to go even further to the very basic of, are you nice to yourself, right? Self-compassion is missing. We can offer suggestions, and I have the best advice for the world, but am I applying that to myself? And if I'm not, that's contradictory and continues to stigmatize change. So the more that we can normalize the conversation, lead by example, and be transparent about, and one of my favorite things as a leader is to say, well, guess how I screwed up today? Because we don't model making mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Why aren't we sharing in that, right? Because even recovering from a mistake is an important trajectory for somebody else, right? So I just think that, the more that we can talk as everyday individuals about good days and bad days, how we create self-care opportunities, boundaries. I always talk and joke about romanticizing the grind, like, having some of that prioritizing to, and it's not, for me, it's not a separation from work and personal. My work is my life is my work, but I also need to model at 10 o'clock at night that I'm not expecting my employees to respond to a 10 o'clock at night email. I shouldn't be sending emails at 10 o'clock at night, So I think it goes back to normalizing it, modeling it, and then just carving space for these everyday conversations. So I just have to say thank you again for making this part of our everyday conversation today.
we need to talk about mental health a lot more. And you know what? We are our own worst critics. And
100%.
I can share that one of the very first therapists I ever had strongly encouraged me to every day, and it'll sound corny, but it actually does work and it does help. She said, every day when you get up and you go in the bathroom and you look in the mirror, she said, I want you to say, I'm okay, I like me. She said, because at some point you'll start to believe it.
Right.
And it's
that's
true.
that's that training of the brain, right? If you
Mhm.
keep saying it. So one of the things I share is I have a gratitude practice, and to others, it might be prayer, but at night I give thanks for 10 things. And then I try to fall asleep with 40, 50. I just try not to stop. Right. And of course I can repeat every day, my dog, my kid, my safe travels, but it's about being intentional with a practice. And I believe it. My life is good. I am blessed. And throughout the day, I keep finding more things to acknowledge later tonight, right? So my mind is focused on what is good. It didn't happen overnight. That was a intentional process over time that allows me to focus on the good every day.
If everybody could do that.
Not easy, right? Yeah. Yeah. And even in our staff meetings, every close of a staff meeting, I say, all right, give me 2 good things about today or that you like about yourself. And some days I don't have anything. All I can say is I woke up today, and thank goodness for that. Right. So even I think one of the things that we are missing as a society is celebrating wins. We need wins, and I need cheerleaders with me. Right. I think we are so self-critical, and then we have insecurities. So now I'm criticizing you too in my mind, when really we should be normalizing support. We should be normalizing and reaching into, and I've even said this, go care some more, right? How do you do that? So really providing the space for people to explore what support looks like, feels like, and how to put it into practice. That's another thing that NAMI really works on in their support groups.
What do you see, and as you see the numbers of people that come through and use the services that NAMI provides, has that number grown over the years? Do you see in a specific demographic? For instance, I think of the younger generation with social media that Chris and I didn't have when we were younger. But the pressures, I think about the pressures that maybe some of the younger folks feel, that maybe there has always been bullying and whatnot, but maybe not to the extent that they may feel, whether it is really happening or more, just a sense that they feel like they're being targeted. Have numbers changed? Have demographics changed on the types of folks you're seeing come through maybe over the past 10 years, if you were looking just at a trends or anything?
Sure. And as a field, I can say that our numbers have grown. I think the awareness around mental health, we for generations just buried it and kept that in-house, and that's not something we talk about. Even some of the protective factors that have existed culturally or within faith are also have been hindrances to getting treatment. So there's a lot of things that are changing around just awareness. I think our youth numbers have grown exponentially and are really alarming, especially from, I think it's close to 50% of kids. I mean, it's like 47% have been depressed over, for the last 2 weeks. And that's a common thing for them. And I think, with their awareness, um, they're very aware of all access to all of it, but what can they do about any of it? That's pretty overwhelming to think that this is my future. The earth is burning, and I mean, there's just, they see all of it, but what can they do about any of it? And that's where I go back to creating wins for them and places for them to create impact themselves, giving them a voice and autonomy in their journey and their future, I think is really important. Additionally, we have seen numbers increase with our senior population. Isolation is a huge issue for them, keeping them connected to social engagements. The same thing with our veteran population. we tend to service people that are already engaged or extroverted enough to look for services. How do we serve people that aren't coming to group, that aren't reaching out for help? I think that's our job, to create a shared message in community. How are we prioritizing the need for mental health care? I think, that might be help in that area. But and I can just say everywhere these numbers have increased, definitely post-pandemic, but we were trending toward that. And I do have good news to say that from a reentry standpoint, we have seen people coming out of prison owning their diagnosis, seeking treatment, when ultimately they probably should have been in treatment the whole time anyway. We have criminalized mistakes, we have criminalized addiction, we have criminalized mental health illness. So I think just sort of finding a way through that to normalize it, maybe we'll see these numbers sort of balance out. But our LGBT community, our minority communities, all of that is on the rise, because not only is awareness greater, but the challenge is that we don't have a good divide, or again, we're still stigmatized in a lot of these spaces. So how do we move the needle forward? We're still just scratching the surface on awareness at this point, I feel.
I think that some of this needs to be talked about in school, because if I have to teach first graders what to do when there's an active shooter drill, because I didn't have to learn that as a child. I only needed to learn what to do when there was a fire or a tornado, okay? And that didn't happen real often, but when I have to teach first graders, second graders what to do if there's an active shooter in the building, then I also need to talk about how that makes them feel and why.
Yes. Yes. You just said something so important, because we never had to worry. Maybe there's going to be a tornado. I know how to get under my desk now. I'm good, right? I'm not going to worry about that. But knowing that I could die, or my classmate could, these are not realities we ever had to face. So recognizing that these impacts are playing out in our youth real time. It is shaping how they feel, their safety in a classroom, how their parents are also relating to those same stressors, right? So yeah, it's a lot. So the more that we can just streamline this as, yeah, it's okay, I struggle too, because these kids internalize that we all internalize we're broken, we're defective, no, your brain is, you are an individual, and your journey is yours. You're not alone.
Yeah, those are all really good points that it's just so much. I feel like we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg on some of these things, so just a lot to take in. And that your resource, it's so good that we have a resource locally that can help navigate that. So
yeah,
so
and let me just plug too. One of the things that we really think is vital in moving the needle is, again, normalizing this whole approach that everybody, mental health is part of whole health. We have our NAMI annual walks event May 18th. This is the largest mental health community event that we do every year. And it's a way for us to create allyship in force, right? You can see this unifying mission of the community to come together and stand around mental health. We do this walk this year. It's going to be at Middle Grounds, May 18th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's just a way for us to come together, normalize, share resources, and really just celebrate that this doesn't have to be something stigmatizing and just negative, right? How do we make this a positive thing? I even like to tap into all the things that are good for our mental health. Sunshine, great for my mental health. Water, great for my mental health. Conversation and dialogue, great for my mental health. If we don't start crediting those things as an active thing we do for our mental health, then it's still out of reach for everybody else, because they think they have to be committed to medication treatment, and maybe that's necessary, or they have to be actively doing a journal and workbook. No, it is all of us normalizing and just showing the different ways that we can have positive coping skills around our mental health.
Agreed. Just to wrap this up, Mariah, I'm curious to know, how are you guys funded? Is it private pay, insurance, grants?
Sure. Well, I just mentioned NAMI walks. We are funded through the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County, the Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Board, NAMI Ohio as an affiliate, or I mean, as our state organization funds some of our work as well. All of that is tied to a specific outcome. Having flexible funding to react appropriately, pivot based on the community need, that is where that money from the walk really helps us create new programming and again, respond appropriately. A lot of times in community, we are so focused on driving an outcome or an objective that we're sort of glossing over the impact, or we're not paying attention as much to the impact. So while it's extremely vital and important that we continue doing things like support, didn't get to mention, we also have a creative art workshop, finding a neutral way to bring up emotions and process them. It's a neat program, but a lot of that is, again, very specific to what we have to deliver and what we can work on. So having that flexible funding, even to be able to respond to the needs of our community. If somebody, is really struggling with a mental health crisis because their car is broke down and they can't get to their job, do we have the flexible funding to react and help them in that manner? Now, again, there's great partners in some of these spaces to do that for us, but my hope is to be able to pivot and do things a little differently as we continue to build this work. A big focus for us is that workplace wellness space. How do we hold companies accountable? How do we all step up into the accountability space to drive change?
Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very informative, and I'm going to check out and see if I'm available to do your walk on the 18th.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
We walk together.
I would love that. I would love that. Please do.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody. Appreciate it.